Thanks. Okay. And looks like officially we're supposed to start in, well, exactly now. We'll give everyone, oh, Mike's here. Hi, Mike. And,
Mike's from the Surviving Death documentary, right?
yes, yes.
Yeah, I saw
Anyone,
him there.
and he also wrote a wonderful book too called Love Dad.
Yeah,
The same thing as me, a science-minded atheist who got really strong evidence of the afterlife after his dad passed. So definitely
yeah.
check out Mike
We're both
Anthony.
with the same. We're both with the same publisher. I saw. So interesting. Yeah.
Oh, good, good. So, hi, Mike. And yeah, please, everyone, check out his book, Love Dad by Mike Anthony. And let's see.
Free PR.
Yes.
Yeah.
I always give my friends shout outs. I think they're all amazing. I love my friends. So, everyone's doing such cool stuff. So, yeah, it's officially now the exact time we're supposed to start. So, you ready to start, Jake? Want to give it a few more minutes
I'm
for
good.
any of your followers? Or
I'll follow your lead. I had some people. Hey, Sharon. Doing?
great. Okay, well, let's get started. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on this Instagram Live. I am so excited because I am talking to a friend of mine who also really inspires me. His name is Jacob Cooper, Jake. And he will give himself a proper intro of his history and story, but from my perspective, he had a near-death experience, and it's just so evidential and amazing. And for someone like me, who's still really skeptical, has dealt with grief, meeting someone like Jake is, I see he's normal, intelligent, grounded, and then you just have to believe him when you hear him and trust his perspective. So for someone like me, who's dealt, with having a hard time sometimes believing an afterlife's real. Oh, yes, Darren. Yes, NDEs are your domain. It's really good to get to talk to people like Jake. And he also wrote an amazing book, and I'm going to let him do his proper professional intro here.
Yeah. Is it okay if I say to people how our crossed paths? Is that
At Forever
cool?
Family Foundation? Definitely. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So I know our paths crossed at the foundation summer retreat. I was very honored to be the first ever near-death experiencer to present with the foundation this past summer, and I know we connected there. But I know the foundation does a lot of scientific stuff as well as evidential pieces, and I think it was great to get the NDE involved. And I know the foundation was a part of Netflix's Surviving Death, and the first segment was NDEers. So it just seemed like they were in lieu with that documentary by adding on, an experiencer, and it seemed to get, good support, good feedback, and just other paths up the mountain, of the non-linearity of consciousness, body to body, lifetime to lifetime, that when the body goes, we still continue, so.
Yes, yes. And would you also, just as we're getting started, so Jake presented his NDE, will you just tell the name of your book, your website, your publisher, anything that you think is important to share?
Sure. Sure. My book is titled Life After Breath. It's published by Waterside Productions, out in California. And, here's my book for readers to see. There it is. And it's my first book that I published last December. And, it's been endorsed by the likes of Dr. Bernie Siegel, Anita Morjani, Dr. Rita Moody, and, Mark Anthony, Suzanne Giesemann, and more. It's gotten, some good feedback and support. And I think, I always get interviewed, and when people interview me, they probably know my book better than I do. And why I say that is I just put it out there, and I'm sure you, with your work, will understand this. It's just you kind of put your work out there, then after that, it becomes someone else's, kind of story, and they take ownership of their own spirituality. So, but it's had a life of its own, and that's what I love. But, I do public presentations, private work, and just a lot of different things. And currently I'm completing my second book now, which is really exciting. So I'm almost done with that.
Are you allowed to say what that's about, or Do we have to wait?
Oh, no. I have no restrictions. That book is titled The Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder for now. But it's funny, my grandmother joked, she said, is it Jacob's Ladder or Jacob's Bladder? And I go, depending on how good it is, that'll be the reader's perception. But, Jacob's Ladder is, has a lot of allegory with my near-death experience and my name, which we'll get into. But, that book is a lot of the, I view life after breath as the karma of my near-death experience, which is kind of like the story, versus the wisdom of Jacob's ladder is the dharma, the lessons, the meaning, the purpose behind it. So, it's a nice segue to life after breath, and kind of like its its younger sibling in a way. So.
Well, I'm just also going to take 1 second to tell everyone, in case somebody here, one of our listeners, doesn't exactly know what a near-death experience is. So that's essentially when someone physically passes away, their heart stopped, there's even been no brain activity monitored, and through medical intervention, they're brought back to life. And they have absolutely incredible experiences, and there's fascinating similarities between a lot of them. Essentially, it's one of the most evidential bodies of research that we survive bodily death in some way. And Jacob's one of the people who had one when he was very young. So I'm going to ask him a lot of questions about it. Any of you who have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. And that's a little bit of the background. So I'm going to first ask you, just tell the story. I know you were so little, if you were 3 or 4. So what happened?
Yeah, I had my near-death experience as a result as something known as pertussis, otherwise known as whooping cough.
And you were 3, am I right? Is that how old you were?
September 1993. Yeah, you read my book, didn't you? But I went to a playground, innocently, and as a result of whooping cough, I had suffocation, going up on a ladder on a slide. And, after losing, the breath in the body, I was able to surrender to the breath of eternity. And the period of suffocation was incredibly traumatizing.
I'm interrupting you. Surrender to the breath of eternity. That's someone who's probably spiritual like you knows what that would mean. Someone like me who's really has not had that. What does that mean? What does that feel like? Like, as just a layperson, how would I understand that?
Yeah. Right. Well, I know you're talking about NDEs, and a lot of them are euphoric, but I experienced part of the distressing elements of a near-death experience. And important to note that not all near-death experiences are euphoric. Some have distressing, almost kind of hellish experience. But if you ask me, my perception is true NDEs, when you cross over and you go to the other side, it is completely euphoric. When you don't really cross over and you're still, in between the two worlds, it could, be distressing. But surrender is a principle that I really highlight in my next book, The Power of It. But essentially, there was nowhere to go in suffocation. There was no oxygen. There was no anything. My body wasn't working or responsive. And literally, as a result of deprivation of oxygen, I felt my brain literally snap in half, as if you take a plug out of a wall, and I just felt this large crack. So
you felt that,
as the saying goes,
crack went through your brain. That was a physical experience.
Yeah, I could go back to it this day very easily, and I think trauma is one of the reasons why I'm able to hold on to this experience so clearly, combined with the fact that it was totally outside of my brain. It was in the nonlinear consciousness. But surrendering to this, power meant that I was able to let go of my own suffering, and I crossed over to the other side, and I allowed that power to be my saving grace. So with the body not working, I was able to surrender to this, eternal consciousness on the other side, and that, to me, was the breath that, got me into existence. It was who I was and what I was forever connected to, which is an eternal spiritual being here in limited in this physical body.
So you felt
So
like
I
the
was able to come
pain,
back home.
an inability to breathe, and then it was like, what did you tell yourself? I'm just letting go. So you felt the crack through your brain, and then what happened? You
Through letting go, everything happened. Once I let go of suffering in that period of suffocation, I was felt with the ultimate, breath of life, which is beyond this physical body, which is who we are, where we come from, what we're eternally connected to, and that can never be taken from you, and it goes beyond our last breath. And I'm living proof of it, you know.
so
And I think we all are in a way, because we lived many lives and died many deaths, I firmly believe. And so we go on, body to body.
so what did it feel like after? So you felt 3 years old, this experience of suffocating, you let go, and then what did it feel like? Is it explicable to people who haven't experienced it?
To me, not really, but to viewers, the reason why I try to say words is it's the vernacular that we have in this world, and it does something. But any near-death experiencer will tell you, to ourselves, words do not fully capture it. But the beauty is with those words, it could open up, doorways and changes in lives, and that to me is immeasurable. So that's why I talk about it. But if you ask me, do words equate it on a personal level? No. There are, words and colors and sounds and feelings so far beyond this reality. So we're using a limited context. But now that we're here, it's our ultimate superpower that we have. It's how we communicate here on this planet. And so, near-death experiencers and spiritual teachers are kind of like artists, where you get this vision and you have to do your best you can to draw it on the canvas in front of people to depict it as accurately as you can, but it's a limited context.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to have, this is all so interesting. I have like 30 questions inspired from that, but I just want
Yeah, you got to coordinate, yeah.
So, D Free 444. Hi. So, hi Jacob. I haven't read your book, but look forward to. My 2 NDEs were pain-free, completely relaxed, and physically unscathed. Wow, that sounds incredible. My horse reared up and over on top of me, and you were drowning. And then he wants to know, what is the physical feelings you still experience from your NDE today? I assume yeah. I guess if you do have physical feelings still from it.
Yeah, I mean, it's the most intensified traumatic event that I had in my life, yet the most euphoric and rewarding. And so I look at my NDE as a double-edged sword, but the more meaning, the more purpose I have it, the more healing I have from that period. But, unless you've been there, it's hard to describe, but breath is what keeps us going unless you're on a ventilator or oxygen supply, and so oxygen assistance. So, when that's taken, you're put in this place where the body's not working, but you're not over there either. And so if you're familiar with Dr. Eben Alexander, his NDE, due to bacterial meningitis, he had something a little bit more elongated, but he was just in this kind of like eternal period of suffering that he felt. And then, eventually, like myself, he crossed over and, entered the light, and, the rest is history. So, but I would say it was pain, but it was also euphoric, knowing how limited pain is, that it doesn't last forever, and even the most painful experiences transform, and they go back, we all go back to home, no matter what.
And you experienced that. Wow. And did you see loved ones? Did you just feel joy? How was it? You said you saw colors that don't exist in this realm. Am I right did you say that?
Yeah, I mean, the closest colors that I could describe is kind of like a bronze and gold color, that I was seeing through the angels. But I was able to see angels, spiritual guides, loved ones, awareness of, the endless apex of life itself and all that ever is and ever was, which the best way I could describe in our vernacular, but the most limiting way is the word God. But, that word is beyond limiting. There is no word. When you're talking about the infinite, you can't have a word to properly ever describe it, but it's in the doorways of who we are and what we're forever connected to. I would say, having this experience was a lot of amnesia. It wasn't something new. It was a familiar place that, I know was home. It was, I think the feeling is just the forgetfulness, even at 3 years old, as to how the blinders of the human condition could happen and how we could forget our essence, our home, and how we're still connected to that even while being alive in this body. So just so many layers of forgetfulness, was there.
So that's kind of where we come from, our consciousness, and we go into bodies, and we can't see these certain dimensions or experiences, or that is our home, and that's where we go back to when we pass away. That was your, and you felt like you were like, oh, this is where I'm, like, my source or home, and that's how it felt when you went back.
Yeah, and I don't I don't necessarily like to talk about, other experiences, but I think, one of the historical figures who knew heaven better than almost anyone, Jesus would say, the kingdom of heaven is within. Each of you have that inside of you, and I think sometimes we forget that. In our world, we're taught that in order to have a certain echelon or to be somewhere, you need to do something, but we're not just here to potentially transform, heaven on earth, but we forget that we are literal segments of consciousness of heaven here on earth, and that is a phyla of what we're forever connected to.
So
You
you used the word angel. Like, what would you define as an angel? Because, to me, it doesn't seem like something real. It seems like those little, like, ornament decorations with wings that, like, your parents tell you are real when you're like 5, and as they tell you the tooth fairy's real. Like, that's what I always think of when I hear angel. So, like, but you had this literal experience and used that word. So how do you perceive angel that you saw?
Yeah, I mean, I know when you look at some of the art out there and, pictures of that, I always say something comes from somewhere. It's not, random. And when you're an artist, you really are tapping into a high point of creative receptivity. And so I think those are somewhat accurate. But, there's many different realms, of the angelic realm. I think there's the higher angelic beings, archangels, spiritual guides, which you call guardian angels, which are really contracted with you before you get into this body, into this lifetime, and might have joined you in other incarnations. And then there were just, angels that I saw in my NDE, which were very childlike in their presentation. I think distinguishing factors of the angelic realm is different vibrational frequencies. I think spiritual guides, at least to me, have a lot more of a micro understanding of the human condition, a lot more human characteristics, although they are beyond beautiful and beyond words. But the angelic field that I saw in my NDE was more uniform in their presentation. And they were a lot less concerned with me, myself, but more concerned with the energy field and the planet. And so, like you, when I was seeing this field, and I know like many people who have NDEs, which is kind of like a rubber band, where you just stretch yourself back to the other side of this rubber band and you come back. Right? Otherwise, you wouldn't have a near-death experience if you didn't come back from stretching the rubber band and going to the other side. But there's an incubational period, an adjustment period, even if it's incredibly familiar. And so like you, when I was seeing this, I'm like, oh my God, they're literally right in front of me. And it was just like a thin veil. And so what I would say is, that, the other side, to me, did feel like a million miles away, but it also is right here overlaying this reality too. And angels are literally, you just turn a dial slightly up, like they're right here in this thin veil separating the world. So they're not that far away. They're really not.
Do you think did they used to be people on this planet or another planet, or eons ago in another Big Bang, Big Crunch universe? Like, have they had experiences as being humans as well?
I can't say no word yes, but it just seemed like they had a lot less human characteristics. They were just so pure, unconditional, and uniformal, in their presentation, whereas the spirit guides, were a lot more kind of grounded in their energy. And, who knows, maybe they become so pure through different carnations that they get to that point. I don't know, but I like to think of this Earth School as a training ground to be a spiritual guide. I really do, because in a way what we do here is our own heaven, and the life that we live, reflects in some ways, what we experience when we cross over, in some regards.
Yeah. And it seems like through the evidence we come here for multiple lives, at least, according to Dr. Jim Tucker and Ian Stevenson. Did you have any memories of other lives, or?
Yes, I know, it's more in-depth and chronicled in Life After Breath, but I always say from completion we begin, and messages are, continued, until, deeper lessons are embraced through incarnations. I say carnations, and that sounds like flowers. I like the word better, though, because incarnate, I feel it's like you incarnate, but it's not, it just doesn't add up. But there's a lot of different school of thought. I know some people say that life is a school where you're here to learn things, and I would say yes and no, because I think the soul, in its own way, comes from an all-knowingness. But I think in a way we're here to integrate that awareness, into different lifetimes. So we evolve, throughout different existences and lifetimes, and it becomes ingrained in who we are versus, our awareness, and maybe some separation of that, within the soul's evolution.
Okay, so a few questions are coming in. Darren, were you raised in a religious lifestyle as a child? I know you go into that some in your book too, but.
Yeah, I was. I grew up, in that kind of home, obviously very loving home, and, still keep in touch with my family, but it was different. It's kind of like, I'm a little bit kind of like Benjamin Buttons and Brad Pitt, if you're familiar with that movie, in a sense that you had this experience, and people get older chronologically, but there's a lot more forgetfulness sometimes with people, within their own spirituality and their own empowerment, and so I think religion is kind of a God outside of ourselves, but the spirituality, is an inner God, an inner awareness. And I think the afterlife exists not because of religion, but despite of it, in a way, and so it's a much different rapport and engagement, with life itself. I think one angle is something that we're taught, and one angle is a foundation of who we are, and what's inside of us.
Right. Yeah, and I know from like other conversations and from reading your book, you were raised, your parents were like very Jewish and believed in God and believed in Judaism. How did they feel? And I know your grandfather, if I'm correct, was not so religious, but the rest of your family was. How did they feel about you having such a different perception, and also having had, based on an experience, I mean, at a young age, it's not like, you're 19 and been at college and are like, I see the world differently. I mean, most 4-year-olds don't have that kind of wisdom. So how did they take that?
I wasn't like the kid from Heaven is for Real, if you're familiar with that movie, who just kind of got up. It's kind of like a boy, I think, who had an NDE, and they made like a major motion picture of it in a book.
I have to give a disclaimer. I've heard it
It,
it was turned out to be bullshit. But I don't know this
yeah, no, no,
personally,
no.
but I do
What
feel
I'm saying
ethically
is,
I have to give a disclaimer about that. So
yeah. No, but and fair enough. What I'm saying is that kid was like very in the movie, very matter of fact. Like after he had his experience. Where I was different. I didn't just right after this come out and say what I had. It took me a while, which is a lot more common for near-death experiencers, especially as kids. For them, it's something just so sacred and so precious that, we hold on to it. Combined with the fact that words are just so limiting, I just couldn't put it, into words yet. It took some time to really process. So just because something isn't outwardly portrayed doesn't mean it's not a truth within. It just took some time for the inner and the outer, to integrate. But it was more on me. Like I was very rebellious against almost anything. I was usually the most difficult kid in my family. We all had the same food, the same house, the same everything, but I was a big outlier. And I think this experience, kind of put me at that way where, in a sense, I was taking off this kind of conveyor belt in a way where it was hard for me to just kind of go with the flow. I just knew something was different. And, I wasn't this just empty kind of slate or this empty vehicle. I was, wasn't necessarily this body or this child or anything like that. So it took a lot for me to just have radical acceptance of myself as Jake, versus when I had my near-death experience. It's kind of brought me up to this timeless soul in this finite being. So it was very complex, growing up. And it wasn't, I didn't do a very good job at explaining myself, but it takes decades to really integrate and make sense of, I think, and examine.
I have a lot of questions about what you just said. I just want to touch on some of our viewers' comments. Darren, good, thank you. Darren believes the fraudulent one was called The Boy Who Came Back from Heaven, he believes. And what I said was fraudulent. I'm not saying, I'm not making any positive claims either which way. I just think so. So, and then I don't want to say 100% that I know one is fraudulent or not. I would have to look at it a little. And then D Free 444. Do angels, guides, others still connect with you here on this plane? And I guess apparently I apologize if this isn't how you pronounce it, your Instagram handle, but dfree144 said that you still connect and always have with the presence. And I know you commented earlier you yourself have had an NDE, and you still connect with the presence that you
I do, yes, that too.
as God.
Yeah.
So.
Connect with the president and the presence too. I could say that just
with this president, I wouldn't feel so good about the previous.
Yeah. I take a pass on that one too. I hear you,
Yeah.
But I think we all do.
Yes.
I think we all connect. Not all of the unconscious is conscious, and the near-death experience was the most, in a way, unconscious to be conscious experience, where in a sense that we have amnesia of what's around us and what we're connected to. At times, some people have a little more recall than others, but through time, I think everyone has the ability to connect and remember and expand their own awareness. And I've had a lot of profound connections, and sadly, like myself and others, sometimes it's like that shakeup of consciousness where something traumatic or something kind of happens where you just kind of like altered, and you just like again that rubber band, you go beyond this body and you go to another realm and then you come back. But I view the brain, and I don't know if you could attest to this, the brain, at least for me, is a great ally between the two worlds. As once my brain literally cracked in half, that's when the other side came in, as the saying goes, or when you could say my brain cracked in half, my brain cracked open and God came in. I mean, that literally happened to me. And so that's really been an impetus behind my work in mindfulness and hypnotherapy, because the brain is such a pivotal filter between the two worlds. And I think we have to learn how to use our mind and our brain, not let it use us, if that makes sense.
Some, yeah. Oh, and Darren has another question. Did you find yourself out of body in the earth realm at all during your experience?
Yes, it was interesting with my NDE, as I was aware of what was going on in multiple ways, where I was able to go back to what was happening to me in the earth body, and then I was able to go, like the rubber band, to go to the other side. And so I had multiple forms of awareness. And, I think when we're spirit, we're not limited by the body. Our perceptions and our consciousness is virtually unlimited and very unencumbered, so to speak. So it's a different feeling than what we're used to, being boxed into this dense body sometimes.
Yeah. And so, on that, how did you feel when you came back? I mean, did you feel trapped in your body? Were you happy to be back? Mad? How was that?
A lot of anger, and my mother could attest to this, where it was such a juxtaposition and such a diametric opposite position of being on the other side and then waking up on a hospital bed. Being in this place where all was well, will be well, and is well, eternally, to coming back to being in a different position in a hospital bed. And literally, due to my anger, and I think as well as trauma and just an inability to kind of explain what happened, I literally got in a rage, and my mother told me that I kicked the doctor and was furious. And that's very synonymous with people who have experienced traumas, that they have a lot of bogged down anger, that they can't properly express, at times. And so I think that was a double-edged sword as to why I'm able to remember it. It's like, you think of 9/11, we all remember what we were doing, where we were, but 9/15, 9/16, we're like, I don't know, where were you? So surrounding this NDE, the only thing, one of the only things I remember from my childhood was things related to this NDE, and consciousness expansive experiences, amongst a couple others. But in general, my memory is not that much more different, outside of this profound experience, I guess, in some ways.
Yeah, I mean, it must have also been weird because you had this very deep knowing experience. I mean, just more knowledge than I'd say most adults, even older adults, have in this world. And then there you were in a 3-year-old body. I feel like that would almost feel demeaning. You know what I mean? Like, there you...
Right.
Am I wrong, or?
I mean, when I was on the ground, there were people trying to call me, who went with me in the park. And I remember them calling me, and I just could it relate to how loved ones feel when they cross over, where I was aware of what they were doing and I wanted to communicate with them. I could see them, and I was almost kind of like shaking them, but they were looking at my body, and that was not who I was. And, sometimes the word meat suit is thrown out, and I think the body is very sacred. I'm very grateful. It's a very sacred temple here, but it's not the totality of who we are. It's just a filter. And so we have to use it to our best abilities to really maximize, this experience. But from people looking, talking to me, yelling my name, and I wasn't there, that didn't stop, my childhood. It's like they were looking at my body and what was on the surface versus seeing beyond it as to who I was. And it was frustrating, in that regard.
Right, right. Oh, and hi, okay, my friend D Free is my friend Deborah Freeman, who's amazing. So hi, thank you for joining. I'm sorry I didn't recognize your Instagram handle. And hi, Heidi. Um, right, and but then what about after? Because I mean, when you're like 4 years old, 5 years old, I mean, your life's not yours. Like things are made for, decisions are made for you by people who know so much more than you. And for the average 5-year-old, that's safe, and but in a certain way you must have, I mean, tell me if I'm wrong, I'm imagining that you had a lot more wisdom in a certain way than even the adults around you after an experience like that, at least about maybe how the world works, even if not like how to take a bus or get lunch or anything, you know. So I can't. Did you experience
Yeah.
that? I feel like almost maybe be a little frightening or trapping. I don't know. I
It's, in a way, it felt a little bit suffocating because I think we're used to depending on our parents, and it's not their fault, you know. And so having this near-death experience, that pedestal of the parents was kind of taken down to just an ability to see them as, people that, birthed me and people who are in this lifetime my parents, but beyond that, the ultimate parent, is our creator in a sense, in that we come through our parents but don't belong to them, so to speak. And we're ancient beings, and we're much more than what the world sees us as our parents, and it's just kind of like a temporary role and construct on the stage of life. And so I was able to see the different roles that people played. I wasn't kind of blind in the play. I was able to really like recognize, oh, they're playing their role and it's contracted, versus just kind of like being in the play and forgetting the genesis before the play, and the different acts that people had to play in the theater of life, in this life. But it was hard because the deprivation of oxygen through suffocation, felt like it lasted a while because had this memory, but I just knew the world around me forgot it. And that was a very lonely place where I just, to survive, needed to bog that down. It was always in the background, but I think to thrive, eventually, like the beach ball coming up to the water, I had to make sense of it and take ownership of it. And I think that's nothing different than anyone. Where, in a sense, for us, we have to kind of play the game, but then eventually we come to who we are and we remember who we are and we expand. And, it's kind of like we contract, as kids and stuff like that. And we kind of learn the game, and then eventually we recognize that it's not suitable, it's not sustainable, it's not satiating to an inner part of us. And we begin to start to listen to that itch that there's something more inside of us that needs to be nurtured.
yeah. I mean that all. Yeah, I find aspects of that relatable too. I mean, that's probably a human experience. Yeah. And did you try? Would you ever tell people your story and they wouldn't believe you, or did you just like as you got older, as a teenager, dating, like friends, were you ever like this crazy thing happened to me when I was 3 and people thought you were nuts? Like, how would you handle that, or
Hmm.
did you?
Well, I really kept this to myself. It was very sacred. So and I'm a very private person, yet very public, but there's just a part of me. And I think the weird part is I grew up with friends and like we thought we knew everything about you. And there's just this part of me that I always kept within. And I think I did that to just kind of like fit in and integrate. I mean, there were moments, in my childhood, which I speak about in Life After Breath, where I was tapping into this stuff. And I was able to remember just different experiences after this NDE, how my brain was so changed through the trauma, but also how this sliver of light was moving through it. And that allowed me to really cross over, but also have a heightened sense of awareness of energies around me. But I just knew through different encounters that people around me had no idea what I was doing. And so I kind of like bogged that around. And eventually as a kid, it became more of a nuisance than anything. I didn't walk around saying this is psychic, this is a premonition, but I would see, hear, and know things that would just come into fruition. And it was annoying because I just wanted to live my life, but some things that I just saw, even in my, later adulthood would come true. And it just was interesting, but I kept, that all very private.
So I have heard this, that people who have near-death experiences come back to this world with inexplicable abilities, such as psychic or mediumship abilities. And not that you have much time to compare what you were like before this near-death experience, but you came back feeling like you have psychic abilities that intuitive abilities. Am I right?
I think we all do. I think intuition, is a language of the soul, but some people further develop it, remember it more, fine tune it, if you will. Some, are born with more of an ability to own that gift within this life, but it's something that we all have. But the NDE certainly allowed a different trajectory in my life where it didn't open anything that wasn't there, but it just allowed what was there to be more open, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It wasn't as blocked. So it was just allowing myself to just expand to who I was, without as many barriers.
So you said though that you had some like psychic experiences, would know things. Do you have any really interesting examples of something? Do you remember that like you knew and then came true, or any like what I call what the fucks, I mean, not that your NDE isn't a major what the fuck, but were there any ones?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I could what the fuck say that all day. I love that word, but what the fuck moments. Let me just
Like
see
a
here.
psychic one, yeah, one of the ones you were saying.
Yeah, absolutely. One day, like in high school, I used to be very, for those who know me, I was, I am still very empathic, but I was very overweight due to a number of reasons. I think a lot of it was stress and some of the psychotropic medications that I was on, as a child. But I used to get teased sometimes for my weight. And, one day a kid, teased me, and I just remember it just being in the auditorium in high school. The kid was like a little punk. And, and I just had like an image of this kid. It just said, this kid's going to go in a couple of years. He's going to die young. And it wasn't like vengeful. It was just a knowing, And then one day, on a Saturday morning, I was commuting to work, to my job at like 8 a.m. And the road that I just would go on every day was blocked. And I'm like, what's going on? And then with a couple hours, I was able to put the math together that this was that same kid that said that. And so
And he'd been in an accident on that road.
Just happened to be that I had to happen to be there out of all roads. It was just a random road, early in the morning, that morning after. So that to me was evidence of like what I saw and how there's a timelessness in times and how we're able to just go past this linear time and see something as if it's it's happening. So I would tap into, that a lot, those kind of things that would just kind of come in, or some kids just getting married and having premonitions of that. But having an NDE, I don't even like to say the word, but I have an awareness of death sometimes in a way, because having this closeness or brush with fatality, I pick up on that a lot. And I don't like to even use that word death to me because it's just so opposite of what it truly is. To me, it's a rebirth. I think it's a death for us who are here, but for the soul, it's a rebirth period and, expansive and freeing period, if you will. I think more so for us, it feels like death. But to me, death is, there's no continuity. So it's a total opposite word than what happens when we cross over, which is why, Raymond Moody, who coined the term life after breath, close with, life after life, he coined the term near-death experience. He didn't have death within his book. He just said life after life. And that's so true.
One thing
within his book
that I at least started to think that made this more relatable to me when I started studying all of this about how we're not just our bodies. Like, think about how we identify ourselves as our body at certain moments, and then it's completely different. Like, I am 6 years old. I am a student at like whatever university. I am, I am like a baby. I am, an elderly woman. Like, all those things we say I am, and they're all just related to a very temporary state of our body. And yet we don't, I know in other languages, like in French, they'll say like the translation of I have, like 12 years old. And here we say I am. And it's very much as if the way we put it together in our language is almost as if we're saying something permanent like that's what we are when we already know it changes. And, you know, our relationships with our loved ones obviously completely change. Like your relationship with your parents when you're 2 versus 25 is completely different. So that for me was, I guess, one part of a very tangible, relatable way. I could somewhat understand what it means that we feel like we're our bodies. We speak as if we're our bodies in our culture, and then maybe we're not. And also, all of the cells in our bodies change over every 7 years. So we're not even
Mm,
in the
mm.
same body. I mean, obviously, there's like coded DNA that we look a certain way. And I mean, some things I'm sure are the same, you know, obviously the code of our hair color, or the code of our eye color, you know, we're look, you're not like a totally different person, but I don't know, somehow like putting all that together made me somewhat able to understand this concept in a relatable way, if that helps. Does that make any sense, Jake, when I put it like that?
Yeah, I always like the saying, we can't ever step in the same river twice. The river is always changing in a way. But I think it's an important value because I think it's important to remember who we are in our eternity, but also to remember the impermanence of this lifetime that we're living. How sometimes we feel that whatever state we're going through is permanent. And even pain, that goes on, that progresses. Even turmoil. And we just have to look at a macro level at the world where, currently what we're going through, it could feel like permanency, but, it goes on. But I do feel the planet and us are very related, where the earth is dependent upon the sun. And so too our inner being is dependent on our own light for it to really take form and to work. And so I think we really need more light on a macro and micro basis for us to progress. It's a dependency.
Are
So
you using the word light to mean consciousness, or like the energy we download into our brain consciousness? What do you mean by light?
it could be different from person to person, but I would just say that inner connection, whatever that is. It's interesting. A lot of people just associate spirituality with mysticism, mystical experiences. And I could say it can be, but it also could be other things too. I think really it's like a deepened relationship to life itself. And here, the deepest thing that we have is our relationships with each other. And so that is a very deep part of our spiritual growth and evolution, is the relationships with each other, but also the connectivity with the depths of life itself. And so you don't have to be burning incense or sitting in a yoga position. You can be, but also you could be someone who's not into this stuff, who just has a depth of life, and they are just who they are. And I think who you are and being true to it is the most spiritual act that you could probably do, is it not? Um, so it's different because I think in our world we sometimes associate, capitalism with spirituality in a sense that we have to attain a lot to be a lot. But it's really, I think of a lot of it as a process of reduction of all the things that we're not, to coming in clear foundation of living from that place of what we truly are,
And Deborah Freeman has a question. Did you understand the same knowing as your human body aged? Did the depth of knowing increase?
I think for a lot of us, it decreases in some ways on
Decreases.
an inner
Okay.
level, but on an outer level, and our ability to articulate it, it could increase. As kids, our vernacular is very limited. But for my NDE, I always hold on to what happened, but I would say in some ways it's broadened, because in a sense that it was a story. It's something that happened to me. And every story begins with a vision, including our essence. And so this was an incredible vision, that I had, that I don't think is anything different than all of us. We all have, to some degree, a memory of this. Otherwise, you probably wouldn't be here today if there wasn't a part of you that had some recollection of this stuff. But I think to me, I was able to find meaning with integrating it to other people, and then other people having that ripple effect occur to them. So to me, an experience is just an experience, but if we give it meaning, it grows into something else, and it evolves even further than what it was. So what happened to me was what happened, and my job really is to make sense and integrate it. I kind of walked into it, and now I have to, make sense and ground it,
So, how well do you remember it? Because one thing I find so interesting is, obviously this happened years ago, and most of our memories, I mean, I remember a lot from being 2 and 3, but it's not foggy. But what I've noticed, and I'm curious if you relate to this, people who have NDEs, like, they'll be like 80 years old and have had an NDE at like 14, and they say they remember it as clearly as if it was yesterday. It's like one of their strongest memories. Do you feel that? Does it feel that like it happened yesterday in a certain way in terms of?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, I'm my own biggest skeptic. I'm a very big skeptic, in fact. And for me, I even doubted myself in a way. I doubted that I was this young when I had it, even though I knew like I was in preschool. But if you listen to my earlier interviews, I would say, oh, I was 4, I was 5. Then for the first time a couple of years ago, I actually had to sit down with my mom about it, because I always just separated synagogue and state, if you will. Not church and state, but synagogue and state.
Both,
and she said, no, yeah, and she said, no, you were 3. And that was a big what the fuck moment, because it felt like 2 seconds ago. It really did. And I was just like, how's that possible for me to just have this so clearly and feel like a second ago? And I was that young. And that's my human part talking. But this wasn't necessarily a human experience. This was a soul experience. This wasn't an experience of ethereal body. I don't think any of that is. Beyond that ethereal body is an eternal being. And we're just using that filter and that personality as an experience of the soul. But beyond that are dozens of lifetimes and experiences far beyond that. So we're timeless beings having these finite experiences.
Which we even are when you look within our lifetime, I mean, each day is different, your friends are different as time goes on. Sometimes you break up families and, it's a lot of changing. Even things that feel at certain moments like they would be permanent. So I know you sometimes I read or hear, and so I do hear I don't know if you hear that. My little dog is having one of those dreams where he's running and making all those little squeaking noises. So if it's recorded on this, that's what's going on. And he's so cute. I'm not going to make him stop. But so sorry if that's distracting anyone.
No, we looked out.
You can't even hear it. Okay.
No.
So one thing that sometimes I hear, and to me, I'll first tell you what I sometimes hear people say is, when you pass away, you go into this other realm, you become one with everyone else, you're not an individual. To me, that sounds horrible. Like, I want to be myself. Like, I don't mind the idea of me being me in different experiences and, different people even, but like, I don't want to blend with like everybody, So I don't know. But regardless of whether I want that or not, do you think that's true, or do you think we stay individuals?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's more of like a Tibetan principle. Okay. It's interesting because I always, pose a question as to when we incarnate, is it possible for the lives that we lived or something like that, for us to have dynamics with those loved ones? Or when someone passes away, let's just say, and they reincarnate again, how come that medium might be able to have that communication if that loved one crossed over? And so, I think, yes, we recognize that we are more than that personality in a way. We have androgyny. We have a lot more awareness. We can be that person, and we could show that person to other people. But beyond that, we become who we are. And I think we lose the temporary kind of filter of the personality of lifetime as a totality of our identity. But that isn't lost. We could still portray that. We could still have that. But it's my experience beyond that that we go to a soul, which is accumulation, of many different lifetimes, but doesn't attach itself. It could express itself. It could use that. But it's a collective consciousness, of who we are. And I think through the linear mind, that's not really so possible to understand. But through a deeper vantage point, we could understand the vantage point from a deeper perspective. And it's not that who we are is ever lost. I think we just even become more than just that. We lose that kind of, just temporary filter or identity that is, but it's not the all, if that makes sense.
It does. Yeah, I mean, again, I guess trying to equate it with this life, like, I feel like I was very much myself, whatever that means, when I was very little. And then I feel like as experiences happen, you kind of get more lost. And I feel like I get to be more myself as time goes on. I don't know and I accumulate more experiences and make more choices. I don't know, maybe it's something like that, like, maybe I'm guessing a little, but obviously I think, as you said in the beginning, there are certain aspects you can't put into words or identify with. But is that at all a way, like, a person like me or someone who hasn't had these experiences could sort of identify with that, what you just said? Like, as they all...
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Right. I mean, there's the conscious, subconscious, and then I think the superconscious, which is
Okay.
Part of us that's very much has an all-knowingness in a way, or a knowing beyond what we're aware of.
Mm-hmm.
And when we do cross over, that knowingness really continues. But we still carry this personality, and this personality, wasn't just started from the genesis of this lifetime. We use different filters, but who we are continually evolves itself and becomes a greater expression of that. But we're always will be us in a way. But I think to understand eternity, obviously there's a lot of different anecdotal pieces of these transformative experiences. We could use our left brain to really have a case and evidence of eternity, but also their direct experiences. I firmly believe that it's possible for people to have that inner knowing throughout different practices. And one of those we could maybe delve into a little bit deeper soon is past life regression, which I think is just fascinating because
past life regression. Yeah.
Yes,
Have you had one?
I do that private. I practice it, privately and with groups. But I think in a way, when you're going through it, it's just a form of hypnotherapy, and you're really opening up the subconscious mind beyond just memories of this lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
But you're able to go into different lifetimes, different experiences, so that there's an inner knowing that we've lived many lives and died many deaths, and you have a clear, direct experience in knowing that you could take with you. And so I think there's many different paths to mountain to eternity and eternal awareness, but they're all the same kind of result in a way, and have that potentiality, whether that be, yes.
Okay, I have a few questions I'm going to ask about this. First of all, do you think our first lives were on this planet in this cycle, or do you think, like, we've lived multiple lives, like, through multiple big bangs and big crunches in this galaxy and others, as, obviously universes, as of now, the science, the most logical explanation, one that seems to be the most true, is, you have a big bang, you have a big crunch, and I would guess this is happening eternally through multiple universes and multiple galaxies. And so do you think that our first lives happened eons ago in other planet material forms?
I'm not going to discount that. I think that's a strong possibility. I mean, I've had a lot of clients who weren't into the whole life on other planets thing and stuff like that, and just through the regression, I've had them connect to lifetimes here on the Earth plane as also lifetimes beyond that. it was just fascinating. And so I can't just discount that. What I could say is the soul and the body evolve, and so, this body, like Darwin would speak about, evolves. And I don't necessarily believe in the transfiguration of souls like we're like ants and stuff like that. I think in a way, we take on different characteristics, but it is possible, I think, for us to have different memories and different planets. And a lot of people have that. So I can't give one opinion or another, but I could say it's definitely a possibility.
Yeah. I would be really, like, it almost doesn't, it seems, I would guess, pretty much impossible that there aren't intelligent material beings of sorts, whether they're humans or evolved other ways, if there aren't other galaxies, universes, planets with intelligent material beings. It just doesn't even seem possible. The universe is so massive.
Mhm.
And so,
Yeah, I mean, that's hard to discount with all the documentational videos and archived, within secret governmental service and stuff like that. And people have had direct encounters, in hotspots of what I call the Earth's kind of acupressure points and stuff like that. I mean, one particular, obviously, I think is in Peru, and that's a spot that people, literally, there's signs on the road that say just UFO sightings, because, they're very kind of elevated states. But I think in a way they are much different than depicted in, media or cinema and stuff like that. They're very much higher intelligent being, but it's hard to discount that. It's hard to discard that. There's been so many different, kind of stories and encounters.
yeah, Leslie Kane is someone who's done fascinating research on that, and I'll link to her in the show notes if any one of you are listening to this on the podcast, not IG Live. Also, I wouldn't be surprised if there were, lots of material, intelligent, semi-intelligent beings on other planets that are like as intelligent as us and less intelligent. Obviously some of the ones, or not obviously, but some of the theories are, that much higher intelligence are visiting us, and there does seem to be some valid research about that. That, again, I definitely recommend reading Leslie Kane about that, because it's really interesting. But I also bet there's just like ordinary beings like us on one of the, God knows how many galaxies, solar systems are out there, that couldn't even begin to imagine going to another galaxy yet. I mean, we're just getting robots to Mars, which, 100 years ago would have been unthinkable. So, but, it's all very interesting. And yeah, I would bet, logically, if given, it makes sense that we would incarnate, whatever, is different. Why just here, for trillions of years? I mean, time at a level we can't even begin to understand. That's actually something I want to ask you. What's your view on time? Everyone says everyone who has NDEs says time is really different than we perceive. Einstein says that too. Particle physics says, quantum physics says that too. So what do you have to say about that?
Yeah. I'm a big runner. I kind of like equate it to time being on a treadmill. We feel like we're moving so many different miles ahead and stuff like that. And on an inner way we are. But I don't necessarily buy into the notion of time at all. And having an NDE, the time that I experienced was an acute awareness that all was well, will be well. And it was just this eternal moment. So I think it's a trick of the mind in a way, but also a good point of resilience. We're knowing that no matter what we go through, it's an experience, but we always come back to a timelessness, even if we feel like we're going through an eternal period of struggle or whatever that is. And I think no matter what, it's something that we perceive on our level, but when we go back home, we recognize that it's all, past, present, future. It's just one moment. And I think Eastern minds and Eastern philosophy really get that, with Buddhism. And I think in a way they just connect to this one sound, this one moment, the point of just, creation, which is Om, and just that one sound and everything coming back to this one moment. And I try to live my life like that with everything crazy. We could be very scattered and we could feel just trapped into this outer experience, getting into the truth and becoming one with this one moment. That's a deepened sense of mindfulness. And if you're able to do that, you're able to flow a lot easier in life, and have this power really guiding you in your everyday experiences.
And Mike Anthony is commenting that treadmill time analogy is one of the clearest he's ever heard. I agree too. So thank you for that.
Yeah. I used to run 8 miles a day in a treadmill, think that I was going far too, but it was effective, right? When we're working hard, we're sweating. Within our life, it's effective, but, in some ways we're traveling deeper and deeper into who we are. But regarding time, there's stillness, there's one moment.
Yeah. And it's, one thing, I guess, good about the analogy, because you really did run 8 miles, but you didn't, in another sense, you didn't. You're still there, and it's like the ground's moving.
I'm just in that one place, but...
Yeah. It's moving. Let's see. Deborah has a comment. I hold the knowing that we ascend from the lessons, that it is possible, for example, you and he have a close number higher towards source, each on this plane. I don't know exactly what. I'm sorry, I don't know. Okay, Peter has a comment, my friend Peter. We live in a 3-dimension plane. We find additional dimensions difficult to comprehend. Time exists for us as a point of reference. Yeah, I like that. Yeah. And it is so complicated to understand other dimensions. I know I found a really interesting video by Carl Sagan where he tries to show how you would explain a 3D cube in the 3rd dimension to a 2nd dimensional being. And Deborah, I hope I captured the wisdom of your statement. I'm sorry, I hope I didn't butcher that. I could tell it had a lot of wisdom, and I feel like I didn't fully give it its due. But yeah, and I agree with your point too, Peter. Yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah, I think I like what familiar with John Holland, his wonderful medium, but I like what he talks about where I think it's all a part of, the spiritual, but we have the human part and we have this awareness. And I think for us, we came here to descend into this matter, for that exact experience. And so I think we don't want to neglect that part of us, but we also don't want to neglect the human experience. And so it would be very hard for us to live in this human reality to not have an awareness of the linear time. We have to, in a way, and that could lead to, productivity and the understanding of this time as limited on this plane, but if we're able, to make an impact, we could transform not only death, but we could transform this finite reality to an infinite through the ripple effects of the life that we live. And so how we engage with the impermanence of time will impact the life that we live. If we're able to have radical acceptance of that and engage with that with a ferocity and a purpose and a meaning, we could really maximize our time here. Because to this day, no one has defeated eternal time in the body. No one has lived that.
Wait, are you saying you think we could defeat eternal time in a body, and would we want to?
No, I don't think anyone has developed that yet.
But you're saying you think
no matter what, science has not allowed us to live forever in this body, so not yet. On a soul level we do. So we have to have acceptance of that, and we have to find ways to make the most of time that exists here,
But, okay, so you're not saying that you think we're ever going to be able, I mean, we couldn't ever, even if we at least I would think, even if let's say we found a way to live for, I don't know, like billions of years, we would still die when the sun burns out, you know?
Yeah, no one's come to that place yet. So
Right.
hasn't been done.
Right. Wow. Yeah, I guess you lost me with a little bit of what you said, though. When you said that if we change our understanding or our engagement with time in some way, we could transform the human experience. Is that essentially what you were saying? I didn't exactly. That went
Right,
over my
right.
head a little.
Yeah.
Can you
No,
explain?
what I was saying was our time here is temporary,
Right. In this,
but from the lives that we live, they could last beyond our years, through the ripple effect and impact, of the lives that we live, so that is possible,
we could
for
live
us to continue.
300 years. Like, how? What do you mean through the ripple effect? Like, not through medicine, like our bodies could live for
No,
300
not our
years.
bodies, but the lives that we lived and the meaning, the purpose, the essence of it. Yeah.
Right. I mean, that could even go on longer. I mean, you have people from probably from the beginning of time. I'm sure, beginning of time on this planet, I'm sure there are even ripple effects of the dinosaurs. It's sort of like you look at the butterfly effect. All these, for all we know, every single dinosaur, every single human has somehow created the world to be the way it is today, however big, however small, along the way, so that's kind of, at least I kind of think that's sort of what you're saying, and at least that's what I think of when I think of, like, we all really do leave permanent effects. I mean, there's so many different ways our material world could have turned out. The economy could have been so different, who's in power, how things are viewed. Like, it could have been so much better. It also could have been so much worse. So I don't know. I mean, maybe hopefully we're moving in a better direction, and sometimes it doesn't seem like it, but I do think we are. But I don't know. What do you think of that? Like, are you of the philosophy we're moving in a better direction or a worse direction?
I would hope so. I think all that we can control is what we can control.
Yeah.
And I think we have a lot more of an impact, on the world around us than what we know. I think for us, being, in our essence and spreading light and spreading love is all within our own wheelhouse of control. And if we're doing that, we are making a difference. Because if we say that we are one, then the oneness that we live our lives by and the ripple effects that we have an impact, beyond our scope of understanding. So
Well, what does
I
we are
think,
one mean? Because to me, I hear it and it freaks me out, because it means that, like, as I said before, like, it seems horrible. The worst thing would be to die and have no consciousness, which is what I used to think happened. And then the second worst, well, I mean, not counting hell and all that. I never really believed any of that. That sounds like fairy tale, but that would probably be the worst. But, like, sorry, not to be disrespectful to anyone's religion. This is just my personal thoughts. But we are one. I picture that means that we're not individuals. As we pass, we all just become somehow the same being. And I hate that. I like being an individual. I like the individuals in my life that I love very much. And, so what does we are one mean exactly to you?
we have the individual and we have the collective.
Okay.
We are in a way who we are, but who we are is beyond just the ego, beyond the personality. It's a greater connected file than what we know of. It's not that we lose that part, So it's not, as someone says, it's not like we're a drop in one ocean, but an ocean one drop, so to speak. So
Yeah.
we don't lose that, but we eventually are able to understand the interconnectivity of the lives that we live. So
Right.
it's hard because when we come from the ego sees the personality and stuff like that. But the soul sees the essence beyond just who we are. The soul connects. The soul is virtually unlimited in its connection. So we come from an unlimited vantage point. We're able to see beyond the limited self and the interconnectivity, of all things.
And okay, here's a comment from Papageddon. Yes, they also mentioned the ocean, like a drop is one with the ocean, and you can take the drop out of the ocean and look at it, but it is part of the ocean. Yeah. And Deborah also has a question. Has a medium ever read you? If so, how did the reading leave you?
Yes, I mean, these days it's hard for me to get readings just because a lot of this is Googleable or in my book. So I try to keep as much anonymity as I can. But I'll give you an example. I was read and someone just knew me on a first name basis, knew absolutely nothing about me. And there were things in the reading that nobody could have known that were not Googleable. But they started off the reading saying, I have a deceased child that's crossed over. Was that you? Do you have a son, or did you cross over? Did you have? And she just picked up on the fact that I was a child and I crossed over. So that kid that had that NDE was, in a sense, crossed over, but I am still here in a way, if that makes sense. And that was very profound amongst so other things. So I think when you have a near-death experience, there's a part of you that you were living that crosses over. And I think sometimes in order for us to find ourselves, we need to lose that part of ourselves in a way. But that was very profound that they picked up on my near-death experience. And again, they knew nothing about me. And if they had my book open and my whole Facebook profile open, whatever, I mean, there was stuff in there that I'm like, I didn't even remember that. Yeah, that's true. So it's pretty evidential,
That is very profound. I actually got chills at that. Yeah. And I know in your book you write about some experiences with mediums that was really interesting to read too.
Right. When that started, she's like, "Did you have a son?" And I'm like, I almost wanted to hang up the phone because I'm like the most childless man on the planet. Like my books are my kids, but I'm like, all right, this is like. But then she was like figuring out, because on the other side it's kind of like charades. They give you images and impressions and stuff like that, and it's not the medium's job to create that, but just to be the messenger and the interpreter. Nothing but that, So it was interesting.
And God, it's been over an hour. It's been an hour and 20 minutes. I don't want to keep you too long, but I mean, I could talk to you all day about this. So I'm going to kind of, if anyone has final questions, I have a few. There's one I always wonder, like people who cross over and mediums say this, that the other side is they feel all love. Now, my question is, I mean, there's a lot of absolutely wonderful people on this planet, beautiful things. There's also a lot of assholes and a lot of people, even a lot of us, I'd say almost all of us are a little, we, even very kind people, do bad things. And that I can have more understanding about because, we all get confused. We all are just feeling angry or grouchy or maybe misunderstand someone. But what I can't wrap my mind around are like people who just really hurt people, like dictators, murderers, like how in a world of all love, if like that's the other side, how do we come here and have some horrible people?
No,
do you have any insights?
It's hard. I'm not certainly. I think we have a God within us, but I'm not God itself. And what I would say is, I think just from the life review, we could detect that when people cross over, they have a life review where they're able to go through the life that they lived and the impact through the other people's lens, and that is felt. And so if these dark entities should decide to cross over, and I think in a way sometimes these dark entities fulfill their role, where sometimes for the earth to change, we need to at times see the polarity of it, for things to kind of evolve, that it's not a one-way trajectory on a macro or micro basis. Sometimes we have big dips and then we evolve further. And sometimes these souls have, their kind of roles in a way to play. But I think eventually they begin, my hope is to understand the level and impact, and that certainly requires a lot of, depth and, suffering. But I can't imagine, I mean, someone like Hitler who killed over probably 10 million people. I mean, how could you possibly feel that or understand that? And so I'm not 100% sure with these outlier souls what their afterlife, if at all, is there. I could say that those who are of the light return to it, but those who are of complete darkness, I think in a way, their own afterlife is a life that they live. So I don't think there's necessarily a hell or an ungiven God, but I think it's reflective of the lives that we live in many ways and what we carry and the vibration that we have. And the more light that we have, the more that when we cross over, we enter that. Um, I think I was giving a talk yesterday and someone said that heaven is very far away and it seems like that. But I think when you vibrate, on a high level and you have a lot of love in you, when you're very connected to your inner being, you don't feel that separation. So it's not that the light has changed. I think in a way souls are very far removed from that. And that to me is the epitome of suffering, separation from your true existence. And we hope that all things return back to its essence as far separate. And I think it's more reflective of how these beings were just suffering, and the beings that were tortured eventually come back. And we hope that, those two come back to eventually to where they all came from. But, it's an interesting topic that we could just talk about in one segment. But,
yeah, and it's definitely more philosophy than evidence, and
that's hard.
yeah. And I guess a lot of life reviews is one of the main parts of an NDE, but you were 3 years old. Did you have a life review? What could you possibly really have in a life review at 3, So I'm curious if you even had one.
Yeah, a lot. And why I say that is it's not a matter of the years of your life, but the life within your years.
So
you could live 100 years, but it could be quite an empty experience. Or you could, and I know I've had this, I met someone for maybe a day, and that day lasts a lifetime. So life itself isn't measured, in time. We're nonlinear beings. And so that was felt, but it was also unconventional in the sense that the life review was also felt beyond this particular incarnation, and I was able to see it in other incarnations. So it was different. But, I was able to just understand that I was much more than just that 3-year-old kid, and I never let go of that. But it's more of the love. It wasn't like, as a 3-year-old, I wasn't doing what we'd say bad stuff or stuff like that, but it was more of the love and the beauty of the experiences that I was able to see and experience. And so it's interesting, though.
Yeah. And did you choose whether you were going to come back or not? I know you hear a lot of people in NDEs get to make that choice.
Yeah, I mean, it's usually one or two positions where you're told it's not your time, or you're giving autonomy. And I was given autonomy.
Or probably there's some people told it is your time, you can't come back, I assume.
It is your time, yeah.
Someone who's 100 years old, or someone who sadly, maybe their body.
That's right. Yeah. Right. In terms of coming back, but that wouldn't be an NDE. That would just be a death.
Right.
If you choose that, if that's what's given to you.
I'm guessing some people don't have a choice too, because I think there's a sadness, some in grief, when you hear, that some people had a choice, and you're like, well, why did my loved one not choose to come back then? I know when I first learned that some people had a choice, I was like, well, really? And my dad chose to stay over there, and some people's loved ones chose to come back. But I also think, I would assume that maybe he didn't have a choice. I don't know. Or there have to obviously be people who didn't have a choice, because for whatever reason, literally the physicality, bodies are maybe too damaged. I know someone once mentioned someone who tragically was decapitated, and they obviously are not going to have the choice. So but
and that's something that I have a hard time with on a personal basis in explaining, because a lot of parents or people could feel, oh, you came back, but what, my child doesn't love me, or how come he or she didn't come back? And it's subjective. what I would say. Each soul has their own spiritual journey. They're not that little kid. And so on their journey, they come through us, they're connected to us, but they aren't owned by us. They're free, infinite beings. And, they belong to the other side in God, and we all do. And that is our home. And I think sometimes when it's time to return, that goes beyond, us in many ways. It could be connected to us, some loved ones, that is a big part of their life, is the theme that they have, but some's, they've fulfilled from their perspective, right? We all could want an eternity with that soul. We all want them forever, but truth of that matter is it's missions, and it's a school, and it's a journey for that particular soul. So I think we almost have to release them to go and to be free, knowing that the love inside of their heart can never be separated from them. And then, as Jesus said, the kingdom within me is within you, and love truly never ends between that loved one and us. It just evolves, and it goes from form to formless, if you will. It goes from limited to unlimited. But I'm sure from our angle, it's hard because we want them at our level. But in some levels, as we know, they're beyond limits,
Yeah. And probably they don't
through the
always
connection.
have a choice. Yeah, we just don't really know, And yeah, I mean, what an amazing experience you had, and you share it so generously, and you share your wisdom so generously with people who, obviously we all have a lot of pain, and grief is part of life, and I feel like stories like yours make such a difference. Is there anything you'd want to leave people with, both about like life wisdom or grief, or anything you kind of want to, I didn't ask, or anything you sort of want to say?
This is a big chapter in my next book, but it's the power of surrender. Surrender in our world is almost seen as maybe a weakness or giving up. But as we know, with frameworks of recovery orientation or any period of change, we have to understand that the greatest power is surrendering to the unlimited power. And I think that's very powerful. Sometimes we differentiate or we confuse force and power. Force wants to control, but power opens ourselves up to infinite strength, beauty, understanding. And so I think for those who are going through grief, a lot of it isn't using force or trying to control it. A lot of it is surrendering to the power, of that. And as we know, it doesn't change. We can't bring, let's say, what we knew to come into the form that we knew it, but it can evolve ourselves to even something greater. And I know from my own experience, and as others, without that shake-up of consciousness, sometimes it's necessary, although we would rather have it the other way, to really expedite our own changes and our own growth and our own evolution within, our lives. So I hope that makes sense, but to really understand the power of surrendering to the flow of grief and transformation, not trying to fight it. And surrendering opens ourselves up and allows us to move through and evolve, with the currents of life.
Yeah. And then lastly, what do you think is the strongest evidence that we do survive bodily death that you have experienced? Obviously your NDE, but how would you, is there a part of it? Is there something concrete you can say that you're feel like your thoughts on someone skeptical and sad asking, skeptical, very sad and grief, saying, I really have a hard time believing we do survive that. What would you say to them?
Yeah. Well, I think certainly going to evidential mediums, I think, is great. I know Forever Family Foundation has a lot of great ones, and I know a lot of my colleagues have one. So going to an evidential medium where they know nothing about you, you are a complete stranger to the ethical ones who don't go on Facebook and stuff. I'm not talking about those. I'm talking about ones that could bring up information such as your bottom left tattoo that no one would know about. You are a complete stranger. They know nothing. You just met them. That to me is something.
Give a
but also through near-death
too. Give a fake name.
Yeah,
Take email, have a
but
friend
also,
say.
yeah, but through near-death experiences, what's something that is profound to me is, and I forget the exact term of it, but it's someone who, let's say, has never seen anything before or never heard, so they might be blind or deaf. And when they have these experiences, they're able to describe sound or visualizations, and they've never known color or never known sound. That to me is profound. Or people who have near-death experiences and are able to have an awareness of things that are happening in the hospital or on the roof in the hospital or beyond that. It's just fascinating. So at the very least, when your brain is not working or when you're flatlined or very limited, your consciousness, if it's produced by the brain, should be very limited as such. But for your consciousness to be unlimited, it just puts the mind and the brain in two separate categories, which then we have to wonder if we're not just our brain and that is not producing consciousness, then what is consciousness? What is that? Where does that come from? And that to me really is indicative that it flows through the body, doesn't come from it,
And Jill just joined and saying hi, and unfortunately joined right at the end. Do you have any quick questions for Jake before we get off? Because he's going to kill me, because I could keep him for 3 hours, and it's been an hour and a half. So,
We'll do other events,
oh,
yeah.
I hope so. It's been wonderful. Yes, I agree. That's one of my. I just actually bought that book to read it. It's by Kenneth Ring, right? So Mike is saying, great book called Mindsight that covers people who are blind who've had NDEs. Fascinating, and that line of evidence alone is quite convincing. I agree. Yes, Mindsight, and that's the research of Dr. Kenneth Ring, who has focused on blind people, who see and report.
I'll tell you a quick. Do you mind if I tell you a quick story about Kenneth Ring?
Oh, no,
I was reading one of Kenneth Ring's books, and I had it on my table. And my dad took a look at it, and he goes, "Ken Ring?" I go, "Yeah." He said he was my psychology professor at the University of Connecticut. Back before he was probably doing this stuff with the world-renowned Kenneth Ring. So just fascinating that my dad had him as a psychology professor, and he was such a pivotal researcher in near-death experiences, and then a kid that we had decades later would happen to have this. So it's just crazy how that works.
Wow.
But yeah, my dad, he was just a psychology professor. My dad had, just before he was the big Kenneth Ring, So.
Oh my God, that's such a small world. Like, synchronicity, coincidence, how cool. Yeah, his research is pretty amazing. Yeah, and then, near-death experiences are incredible. I mean, I'm sorry you went through a medical trauma as a child, but what an amazing experience.
Right.
And I'm glad you came back to tell us about it. And can you, so we're going to be getting off. If anyone, I know, Jill, sorry you missed it. We will be posting an edited version on What the Fuck Just Happened podcast in a couple months. So if you missed any parts of this or want to hear anything again, you can come listen to that. And then Jake, just can you remind everyone about your book, where they can find you, where they can buy your book? I read his book in 2 days. It was so good. So I really recommend it.
Yeah, my book, Life After Breath. You see Dr. Ray Mahmoodi here on the cover. Can be found on Amazon, paperback, Kindle. It's been very difficult to create the audio. I've tried, but it's technicalities. And then you could also reach me through my website for different in-person online services at jacoblcooper.com. That is jacoblcooper.com. And hopefully within the release of the podcast, we could have that in there. My social media links are all available on my website as well, too.
Yes.
So.
And they'll be in the show notes. Thank you so much, Jake. It was so great having you on. I really appreciate it.